In the autumn of 1942, residents of a small town in Connecticut started calling the police to report a flying saucer over the river. They weren't imagining things. There really was a flat, disc-shaped object circling lazily above a factory airfield, cream-colored, about 23 feet across, trailing a strange, thrumming sound that carried for miles. It wasn't from another planet, it was from the United States Navy, and it may be the strangest aircraft the Navy ever agreed to fund. Engineers called it the Zimmer Skimmer. History remembers it as the Flying Pancake, and by almost every rule of aerodynamics known at the time, it should not have been able to fly at all. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Navy was chasing a requirement that sounded almost like a contradiction. It wanted an aircraft that could take off and land in an impossibly short distance, short enough to operate from ships far smaller than a full aircraft carrier, while still flying with the speed and agility of a genuine fighter plane. Every conventional wing shape on the market forced a trade-off. Wings built for low-speed lift and short takeoffs were slow and clumsy in a dogfight. Wings built for speed needed long runways and high landing speeds that made carrier operations dangerous. Into that contradiction stepped a young aeronautical engineer named Charles H. Zimmerman, with an idea that most of his peers considered close to absurd. What if, instead of a long, narrow wing, you built one that was almost perfectly round? Zimmerman's theory rested on a principle most engineers of the era found genuinely difficult to accept. A conventional wing generates lift efficiently near its center, but loses efficiency rapidly near the tips, where air spills around the edge and forms drag-inducing vortices. That's precisely why aircraft designers had spent decades chasing long, slender wings. More span meant less of that wasted tip. Zimmerman inverted the logic entirely. If tip losses were the problem, why not build a wing that was almost nothing but tip? A wing so short and so wide that lift was distributed evenly across its entire disc-shaped surface. On paper, it promised something remarkable: a stall speed low enough for gentle, controlled landings, and a low-speed stability that conventional fighters simply couldn't match. In practice, nobody could be entirely sure it would work until they built one and pushed it into the sky. In February 1940, the Navy signed a contract with Vought to find out. What emerged from Vought's workshop looked less like a warplane and more like something assembled by committee out of spare parts from 3 different aircraft. A wing, nearly 23.5 feet across, shaped almost exactly like a disc. 2 engines buried inside that disc, each turning an enormous 3-bladed propeller mounted at the wingtip. Twin tails, twin rudders, and, sitting on the ground, the entire aircraft tilted back at such a steep angle that pilots joked they needed a stepladder just to reach the cockpit. It was underpowered, almost comically so, 2 small engines generating only 80 horsepower apiece, a fraction of what a real fighter of the era carried. It looked less like the future of naval aviation and more like a mistake that had somehow made it out of the hangar. And then, on the 23rd of November, 1942, it left the ground. What happened next didn't just surprise the skeptics inside the Navy. It surprised the very engineers who had spent years calculating whether this shape could fly at all. Because the Flying Pancake didn't just survive its first flight. Over the next 5 years, it flew nearly 200 times, and along the way, it did something almost no other experimental aircraft of the era managed. It converted its harshest doubters into believers, one test flight at a time. Vought's chief test pilot, Boone Guyton, took the aircraft up first. What he found defied almost everything conventional aerodynamic wisdom predicted. The disc-shaped wing, with its enormous propellers blanketing nearly the entire surface in their slipstream, produced a kind of lift conventional aircraft simply couldn't replicate. Pilots could pull the control stick fully back, hold it there, and the aircraft would not stall in the way any other airplane would. It would simply sink gently, under control, rather than snapping into an uncontrollable dive. Word of the aircraft's strange handling reached one of the most famous pilots in the world. Charles Lindbergh, by then working as a consultant to the aviation industry, took the Flying Pancake up himself. His verdict mattered enormously to the program's survival. He found the aircraft remarkably easy to handle and was struck, in particular, by just how forgiving it was at speeds where any conventional fighter would already be falling out of the sky. Landing speeds that would be dangerously fast in a normal aircraft felt in the Flying Pancake almost gentle. Some pilots reported the aircraft could all but hang in the air, nearly hovering when flown directly into a strong headwind. Not every flight went according to plan. During one test, engine trouble forced a Vought pilot into an emergency landing on a public beach. As the disc-shaped aircraft descended toward the sand, the pilot spotted a sunbather directly in his path. He locked the brakes hard to avoid a collision, and the aircraft flipped forward onto its back. By any normal measure, that should have been the end of both the pilot and the airframe. Instead, the Flying Pancake's unusual structure absorbed the impact so completely that neither the aircraft nor the man inside it suffered any serious damage. It was, in its own strange way, the aircraft proving its resilience by accident. If a story this strange is worth your time, it's probably worth a like, and subscribing means you'll catch the next one too. The V-173 was never meant to be a warplane. It was a proof of concept, built to answer one question: could this bizarre shape actually fly? Having answered that question decisively, the Navy moved forward with something far more ambitious. A full combat fighter built on the same principle, designated the XF-5U, and nicknamed, inevitably, the Flying Flapjack. Where the V-173 had been wood and canvas, wrapped around two feeble 80-horsepower engines, the XF-5U was designed around a metal airframe and two engines each producing more than 1,300 horsepower. On paper, the performance projections were staggering, a fighter that could take off and land in a fraction of the distance any conventional carrier aircraft required, while still potentially matching the top speed of the best fighters flying at the time. It was, on paper, the aircraft that might have solved the Navy's contradiction once and for all: speed and short-field performance in a single airframe. But paper and runway are very different places. The XF-5U's enormous propellers demanded an equally enormous drivetrain, long shafts and complex gearing to route power from engines buried deep in the fuselage out to propellers mounted at the wingtips. And that drivetrain came with a problem engineers could never fully resolve: vibration. Every attempt to run the engines at full power sent punishing harmonics through the shafting and into the airframe itself. Vibration severe enough to threaten the very structure the aircraft depended on. Engineers worked for months trying to tune it away. They never entirely succeeded. And by the time the XF-5U was finally ready for taxi testing in February of 1947, the world it had been designed for no longer existed. Jet engines had arrived, and arrived decisively. An aircraft engineered to squeeze every possible advantage out of propeller-driven flight suddenly looked like a solution to a problem the Navy no longer had. In March of 1947, the Navy canceled the program entirely. The XF-5U, which had never completed a full flight test program, was scrapped, cut apart for salvage, its enormous promise reduced to raw metal. The V-173, the strange little pancake that had started it all, was spared. It was preserved, eventually restored, and handed over to the Smithsonian, where it remains on display today. A quiet, cream-colored reminder of an idea almost everyone once considered impossible. The Flying Pancake never fought in a single battle. It never fired a shot in anger, and its intended successor never truly proved itself in the air. And yet, across nearly 200 test flights, it did something few aircraft in history ever manage. It took an idea most engineers considered a joke and proved, flight after flight, that it actually worked. Some aircraft are remembered for winning wars. The Flying Pancake is remembered for winning an argument that sometimes the strangest shape in the room is the one that was right all along. If you enjoyed this one, there's more where it came from. Subscribing means you won't miss the next. See you in the next video.